Hello, church. Good to be with you today as we have another study in the book of Revelation. And today, well, in the last couple of weeks, we've been going over the seven churches of Asia and their letters to them. And we're not done yet, but I thought I'd just throw a topical study in here for Revelation. And this is going to help us prepare us for the rest of the book. And I just thought we might do something different for a week. But this week, we're going to look at the meaning of numbers and how the Bible uses them. Remember, we want to let the Bible determine what the book of Revelation means, not come along with our American minds and try to determine what it means. So we're going to look at numbers and the pattern of how numbers are used in the Bible. So there's a bunch of numbers. Now, here's a question I have, a little trivia. How many times does the book of Revelation use numbers? 10 times? Was it 53? 86? 22? Or 240? How many times does the book of Revelation use an actual number? Well, that's right. It's the big one, 240 times. That's a lot. So if we're going to try to understand the book of Revelation and they use numbers 240 times, I'm thinking we might have to have this study to understand this, okay? So let's continue. So it is important for us to understand the significance of the use of numbers in the Bible. In reading the book of Revelation, one becomes aware that understanding the meaning of the book would be impossible without some insight into the significance of the numbers used throughout the book. For instance, it seems more than a coincidence that there are 7 stars, 7 churches, 7 letters to the 7 churches, 7 plagues, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 angels, 7 candlesticks, 7 thunders, 7 lamps, and 7 spirits. The number 3 is frequently used number also, and so is number 4 and number 10, and also number 12, as we're going to see today. Two numbers that have caused great debate over the years in our religious world is the number 144,000, okay? We talk about our Jehovah's Witness friends, and the number 666, right? You go through a drive-through and they say you owe $6.66, and you go, oh, it's caused some problems. So only a better study of the numbers will show us that numbers in the Bible often, get rid of my picture here, have meaning beyond just some digits on the page. Okay, so let's start with number 1. And again, we're just going to look at the Bible as a whole and just see if there's not a pattern to how God uses these numbers. It won't always 100% fit, but there's definitely a pattern. So when we look into the number 1, the two shall become one flesh, right? Number 1 means unity or superiority. For example, God is one, unity, right? Adam and Eve became one, and a husband and wife become one. Therefore, when we see this number show up, the number 1 represents unity and superiority. Okay, does that make sense? Now let's go to number 2. Number 2 here. Here's Jesus sending out the apostles 2 by 2. Okay? The animals entered the ark 2 by 2, didn't they? I just thought of that. Yes. Okay. So, under the law of Moses, a person can be put to death at the word of 2 witnesses. Okay? So here, the number 2 means fact. The 10 Commandments were written on 2 tablets. That means these are facts. Okay? The apostles were again sent out 2 by 2. These were God's messengers going out into the world. And when we get to Revelation chapter 11, it talks about the 2 witnesses. And you think about how many times God used 2 to take his message out. Moses and Aaron, right? Elijah and Elisha, right? Um, you see Jesus and John the Baptist, right? Forerunner of Jesus. You see a lot of this. So again, when we get to these numbers here, these numbers have meaning. Take that and apply that when you go into the book of Revelation. So therefore, the number 2 represents the authority of God and his word as fact. Okay? Number 3. Number 3, holy, holy, holy. We see that in the Bible many times. So number 3 here means God's signature. For an example, it is always holy, holy, holy. Always. It's never holy, holy 2 times or holy, 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 holy 4 times. It's always 3 times. See the song to God in Revelation chapter 4, verse 8. And you're going to see there 3 sets of 3. Also, God is what? Father, Son, and Spirit. 3. Thus, the number 3 represents God's signature. And you just wrestle with that. Check these things out. See what you think about these, okay? Then you get to this number 3.5. Now, we're actually going to go back to Daniel on this one. Remember we looked at Daniel? And we're going to look at this phrase time, times, and half a time. So time is 1, and then time is 1, times is 2. Now you got 3, and then half a time, 3.5. This is going to be used a lot in the book of Revelation, as it was in Daniel. So when we go back here to Daniel, and it was making a prophecy to the future, we're reminded of this guy named Domitian. And we're going to see him show up in the book of Revelation, and he is going to crucify a lot of Christians. So Domitian's persecution of the saints. So here's Domitian. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 foretells of the 11th horn. This is the Roman Caesar Domitian, and his persecution of the saints. And the time frame of this persecution is described as time, times, and half a time. Now, as we're going to see here in a minute, since the number 7 means completeness, and half a 7 is what? 3.5. 3.5 must mean for some incomplete period of time. If 7 is complete, then 3.5, half of that, is some incomplete time. Okay, so for some incomplete time, the saints are going to be persecuted. Doesn't give a starting date, doesn't give an ending date, just some incomplete period of time. Now let's go over here to the book of Daniel, and it foretells here the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and this is told here in chapter 12, verse 7. So here Daniel 12:7 foretells of God's holy people being finally broken. Okay? Now staying with the context, this points to Rome and its destruction of Jerusalem. And we saw that. We've already went through these chapters, Daniel 9, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Now the time frame of this persecution is also described as time, times, and half a time. Again, since the number 7 means completeness, and half a 7 is what? 3.5. Then 3.5 must mean for some incomplete period of time. There's not a date given for its beginning, and there's not a date given for its end. Now, let's go over here to the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, we're going to see this a lot. But it's going to come in a few different variances, okay? So in Revelation chapter 11, the number 42 months. What is that? 3.5 years. We're going to see 1,260 days. What is that? 3.5 years on the Jewish calendar. And then we're also going to see in that same chapter 3.5 days. Okay? So 42 months, 1,260 days, and 3.5 days are all used. Different way of saying 3.5. Now in Revelation chapter 12, the number 1,260 days, 3.5 years, is used again. And then in chapter 13, the number 42 months, 3.5 years, is used also. Now, again, what does this mean? In all examples in both Daniel and Revelation, this 3.5 speaks of trouble or terrible times. Okay, persecution. Things are going to be bad. So every person would like to know the beginning and ending of trouble in their lives, right? When is this going to end? How long is this going to take place? Well, God gives no dates in these examples. He only tells us that it will be for some incomplete period of time, and again, showing God's complete control in every event. Now that's important. It's showing that He has total control while we go through those things. And that is taking God out of the box. And that's seeing God and Jesus and the Spirit in a greater picture than maybe we've seen before. And that's what we need to understand. Even though we go through those terrible times, and those people went through those terrible times, God is still in total control of that event. If He doesn't want it to happen, it ain't going to happen. Let's continue. Number four. Number four, we're going to see this used many times in the Bible, the four corners of the earth. Okay? Number four. So here number four means the world or the universal number. Okay? Let me give you some examples. 7 times in the book of Revelation speaks of nations, tribes, tongues, and peoples, or in some such list. And it's always pictured as 4. Okay? So dealing with the world. Okay? You can also see Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, 7, 9, 10, 11, 11, 9, 13, 7, 14, 6, and 17, 15. And look at the universal chorus in Revelation 5, verse 13. And also notice that God's living throne chariot, okay? This is pictured from Ezekiel. It's made up of 4 living creatures that are sent out to the 4 corners of the earth. Again, God is everywhere. And we're going to see this in Revelation 5, but also a book that really pictures this, and we'll see this when we get there, is in Ezekiel chapter 1 and Ezekiel 10. Therefore, the number 4 pictures God as being everywhere. He is universal. Are you seeing a pattern here? God, the Bible does use numbers, and when you start studying them out, they actually do paint a picture. Take that and apply that to Revelation. Okay. Oh boy, here we are. Number 6. You know where we're going with this one, right? Yes, number 6. 666. There it is, right? What is this? Oh, this is the mark of the beast. This is terrible, terrible things are going to happen, right? Well, number 6 means man or man's number and sin. Okay? For example, man was created on what day? The 6th day, right? Genesis 1. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? So we're one short of God's glory. We have all fallen short of God. Well, if God's number is 7, that's His number. If we fall short of that, then what's our number? 6. Makes sense, doesn't it? Also see the comment on 666 in Revelation 13:18. Now, can I just read this to you? This is where everybody gets hung up and stuff. In verse 16 of chapter 13, it says, He also forced everyone, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Okay, so again, people read this and go, that's a literal mark. It's going to be on your forehead or on your hand. People today say, oh yeah, there's going to be a chip in your hand or something like that. Wait a minute, that's not the context of Revelation, okay? It's speaking to these people. The 7 churches of Asia, something going on back then. But watch what this number is. Verse 18 is going to tell us, for this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is what? Man's number. His number is 666. So, what does that mean? You're either following God or you're either following man. You either got man's mark on you by the way that you live, or you got God's number on you by the way you live. Literal? No. It's just painting a picture. That's it. Pretty simple. Don't go beyond that. Okay. Number 7. This is a fun one. And we're going to really look at 7. Okay, so what do we see with number 7? Well, we see that God rested on the 7th day when he had creation, showing that things were what? Complete. It's finished. It's done. Creation's done. We go over here and we find the Sabbath. That man was commanded to keep the Sabbath, right? Mount Sinai, through the 10 Commandments. And they were to rest on the 7th day. And this was commanded under the law of Moses to the Israelites. What does this show? The week was completed. Then we find them going into Jericho, right? When you think about the fall of Jericho, when they went into the promised land, there were 7 priests who were to blow 7 trumpets on the 7th day, and the people were to walk around the city 7 times. And what happened? The city was completely destroyed. Complete. Okay. Here we find Naaman. Remember him? And he had leprosy and went to Elijah, and Elijah told him, look, you're supposed to go over there and dip 7 times in the Jordan River, right? He didn't want to go. But he finally went because his leprosy was so bad. So he went down the water the first time, wasn't cleansed. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, still wasn't cleansed. But when he did it the 7th time, he was commanded to do that 7 times, he'd be healed. And only then was Naaman completely healed. 7 complete. And then we find this. Jesus coming and dying on the cross, and then the resurrection 3 days later, and then 7 weeks later, 3,000 were baptized, and the church began. Watch how this works. All that time period equaled what? There was 7 weeks from the cross to the church. From the time of the cross and the resurrection to the establishment of the church, 7 weeks transpired, showing that now everything was in place. It is now complete. There you have it. Oh, that's interesting. The day of Pentecost, right? There were 7 weeks between that. Then we think about when the Israelites went into slavery, and then they came back, and they came back into the land. Remember what we studied over here in the book of Daniel? The 70 years of captivity. So from the time of the first deportation of the Jews in Daniel chapter 1, we studied this, to the time of Israel's return in Daniel chapter 9 and Ezra 1, there were what? 70 years from 605 to 535 BC, showing that God's judgment on Israel was what? Complete. And then we get over here to Daniel chapter 9. Now, there's a lot in this prophecy. We've already looked at this. But going all the way from them returning to after the 70-year prophecy, right? They returned to the land, and the decree was to rebuild Jerusalem. That was in the book of Ezra. And then they rebuilt it. And then Jesus was born. And then there was the cross and the resurrection. And then the second time that Jerusalem, and the last time Jerusalem will be destroyed in 70 AD, the temple, because it's never risen since then. All of that transpiring, look how the Bible describes it. The 77s of Daniel 9. Now, the 77s of Daniel 9 began with the issuing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And this is after they went into slavery, come back into the land in Ezra chapter 1, and ends with the final destruction of Jerusalem predicted in Daniel 9, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and went from 539 to 70 AD, showing God has complete control over these events. Now, that's really important because he tells us all about it. He tells us everything that's going to happen. That is a huge, massive amount of period of time. And he's telling us that all these things are going to take place. What does that show us? He's in complete control of all of that. He has control of that. Now, there's going to be some really tough things that are going to happen there. But he's in control. And he was, wasn't he? Everything he said would happen, happened just like it said. This example of the use of 7 is not to be used literally, but figuratively. It is used to show God's completeness of these events. So only the context, and we've already talked about this, of the use of numbers will tell us if they are to be used for a literal period of time or is it supposed to be figurative. Context. And in this context, it's got to be figurative. Okay? All right. So again, taking God out of the box. He is in complete control of these things. So you think about that with our virus today. Is God still in control? Yes, he is. If he wanted this, if it was his will that he wanted this virus to stop, it would stop right now because he's in control. But apparently he is allowing this to continue. And we as God's children must remain faithful. Again, we need to take God out of the box. He's much bigger. He is in control of our world. But can you see how numbers connect to this? And they paint a picture and they have meaning? Let's go to the number 8. Number 8 means new beginning. For example, God commanded circumcision for the Israelite males on the 8th day. New beginning. 8 people passed through the flood of Noah's Ark, right? They came out of the ark, they got out, new beginning. Flood's over. We start over again. And if you think about this with the church. The church started on the day of Pentecost, which was the first day of the week, Sunday. But it also can connect to the number 8. Think about this. If you have the first day of the week, which is Sunday, and you go all the way to the Sabbath, which is Saturday, if you added a day to the Sabbath, that would be day number 8. And that's when the church began. New beginning. Just some thoughts. Look at these things. See what you think. It's amazing what the Bible does. Now let's go to the number 10. Number 10, we got 10 toes, we got 10 fingers, right? Well, I like those baby's toes. I didn't want to put an adult's there. Pictures were, yeah, okay. So, number 10 means enough or sufficiency or totality. Okay? For example, 10 is a round number. There are 10 commandments, there's 10 fingers, there's 10 toes, there's 10 days of suffering in Revelation 2:10. Then in Revelation 20, we find the number 1,000, okay, connected to the number 10, pointing to the totality of Rome's destruction and complete reign of God's people. We're going to get to that chapter. Therefore, the number 10 shows sufficient or totality. Hang on to that. You're going to need this when we get into Revelation. And then we get to number 12. This is our last number we're going to look at. You've got the 12 tribes of Israel. You also have the 12 apostles. Now you think about that. So when you look at the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, we find 12 tribes of Israel, Old Testament, 12 apostles, New Testament. Do you think that's just a random number that God chose, or do you think there's purpose there? Well, there's purpose. And what does this represent? I think what we're going to see is this is going to represent the people of God. Now, how am I going to paint this picture for you? When we come to the throne room of God in Revelation 4:4, we find the number 24. Well, 24 is what? 12 plus 12, right? Equals 24. And in front of the throne of God, there are 24 thrones before him with 24 elders. Now, I'm going to come along and say those 24 represent the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, how can I prove that? Because when you go to Revelation chapter 21, well, let's go over there. Let's go over to Revelation 21. And let's read verses 12 and 14 through 14. Now here God is showing us the bride of Christ. Okay? He says, well, let's go up to verse 9. Let's just start at 9. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, 777, right? Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. He carried me away to the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. So I want you to see this is a picture of the bride of Christ. This is what we look like. That's the church, right? That's us. Watch what we look like. It had a great high wall with 12 gates and with 12 angels at the gates. And on the gates were written what? The names of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's interesting. There's Old Testament. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the what? The 12 apostles of the Lamb. That's New Testament. Do you understand that when you look at the throne room of God, that what is represented here in the throne room of God? Old Testament and New Testament. And what did the Old Testament and the New Testament bring us? When you have the combination of all of what those 12 tribes brought us, and those 12 apostles brought us, and everything they represent, they brought us Jesus. Did they not? They did. And that gives us access to the throne of God. So, think about that number 12. Now, we're going to go over here and look at another chapter that uses the number 12. And here we talk about the 144,000. And this is in Revelation chapter 7. And God seals the 144,000. Well, how do you come up with that number? Well, 12 times 12 equals 144. And then 144, you times that by 1,000, you get 144,000. And this represents, in the chapter, the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, each tribe is then divided into 12 sets of 12,000. Okay? Now, the question is this: who are these people? Now, if our estimates are right and correct from the slide prior to this, these 144,000 are simply the people of God, right? 12 represents God's people. Old Testament, New Testament. God's people are being sealed here. So number 12 means God's people. And again, just to give you a summary, there were 12 patriarchs, or 12 tribes, there's 12 apostles. In Revelation 4:4, there are 24 elders. 2 times 12. seated on the throne, showing both Old and New Testaments and all that they represent before the throne. Then in Revelation 7, we find the 144,000 representing God's people before the throne. Then in Revelation chapter 21, we find the number 12 repeatedly used as God describes his bride of Christ. You've got all kinds of 12s there. Therefore, the number 12 represents God's people. That's us before God's throne. Put that to the test. Study this out. See what you come up with. I hope this has helped. But here's the bottom line. Numbers have meaning. There are meanings to numbers. I hope you can see that. You're going to need that as you go into the book of Revelation. Church, I hope you were blessed. I hope you find this very helpful for you, and this will help you and help us to understand the book of Revelation and the entire Bible. And there were so many more examples that we could have gave, but because of time, we were limited. God bless you. Keep studying your Bible and never take your eyes off of Jesus. We'll see you next time.